The Cleveland Browns quarterback battle is already becoming one of the most toxic stories in football, and training camp hasn't even fully started yet. What should have been a normal competition between veteran experience and young talent has suddenly turned into accusations of bias, media agendas, and fans believing Shedeur Sanders is being pushed aside before he ever gets a real opportunity. And now Tony Grossi's comments just poured gasoline all over the fire. Because the second he started praising Dillon Gabriel as the ideal backup quarterback, while questioning the impact of Shedeur's popularity, Browns fans exploded online. Some people are now accusing local media of caring more about narratives and distractions than actual football performance. Others believe Cleveland is already quietly preparing to protect Deshaun Watson no matter what happens in camp. At this point, this situation feels bigger than football entirely. It feels like a battle between hype, politics, money, and whether the Browns are truly willing to let the best quarterback win the job. And honestly, that's where things start getting really uncomfortable. The moment Tony Grossi started talking about Dillon Gabriel being the perfect backup quarterback, Browns fans immediately knew this conversation was about to spiral out of control, because for a huge portion of the fan base, it didn't sound like football analysis anymore. It sounded personal. That's why the backlash exploded so quickly online. Grossi describing Gabriel as someone who stays quiet, studies, and supports the starter instantly rubbed people the wrong way because many fans felt the comments carried an obvious implication about Shedeur Sanders. Supporters immediately started asking the same question. Are you trying to suggest Shedeur doesn't study, doesn't support teammates, or somehow creates distractions simply because he's popular? That's where the anger really came from. Fans weren't just reacting to a depth chart opinion. They were reacting to what they believed the comments represented underneath the surface. And once people started interpreting the conversation that way, social media completely exploded with accusations that local Cleveland media already made up its mind about Shedeur long before training camp even began. Some fans even started calling it the "anybody but Shedeur" movement. Now, to be fair, Grossi never directly insulted Shedeur personally, but perception matters in sports media, especially when emotions around a player are already intense. And right now, Shedeur Sanders is one of the most polarizing young quarterbacks in football. Every comment surrounding him instantly becomes controversial because fans already believe there's bias involved from both supporters and critics. That's what makes this situation so messy. Because once fans lose trust in the people covering the team, every opinion starts sounding like an agenda instead of analysis. A normal football discussion suddenly turns into accusations of favoritism, disrespect, or hidden motives. And honestly, Cleveland's quarterback situation was already emotional before these comments even happened. Now it feels radioactive. What made things even worse was the idea that Dillon Gabriel should potentially sit ahead of Shedeur on the depth chart regardless of talent. That's the part fans really couldn't accept. Supporters immediately argued that conversations should focus on one thing only: who actually performs better on the field. Not who's quieter. Not who creates less attention. Not who makes the media more comfortable. Just who plays better football. And honestly, that argument resonated with a lot of people because it exposed the deeper frustration surrounding this quarterback battle. Browns fans are tired of narratives. They're tired of politics. They're tired of excuses. They simply want the organization to play the quarterback who gives them the best chance to finally win consistently. But then the conversation took an even stranger turn once people started discussing Shedeur Sanders, Shadow, and why some teams supposedly feared drafting him in the first place. That's when this debate stopped sounding like normal football analysis completely. One of the most controversial parts of Tony Grossi's comments had nothing to do with football ability at all. It was the moment he suggested that Shedeur Sanders, Shadow, might simply be too big for some teams to handle. And honestly, that statement opened an entirely different debate that's now taking over Brown's conversations everywhere. Because fans immediately started asking, what does that even mean? According to Grossi and other analysts, some organizations may have viewed Shedeur's popularity, media attention, and massive fan following as a potential distraction if he wasn't the immediate starting quarterback. In other words, reports and speculation suggest certain teams worried that the backup quarterback could become more famous than the starter himself. And whether people admit it or not, that's a real fear inside some NFL organizations. Quarterback rooms are built around stability. Coaches want calm environments. They want backup quarterbacks who quietly support the starter instead of becoming headline-generating storylines every week. But Shedeur doesn't enter buildings quietly. Cameras follow him everywhere. Social media follows him everywhere. Debate follows him everywhere. That spotlight changes everything. Now some fans understand that concern from a team perspective. They argue that constant media attention can absolutely create distractions during difficult stretches of a season. If the starter struggles even slightly, calls for the backup become overwhelming immediately. And with someone as famous as Shedeur, that pressure would become even louder. But many Browns fans think that entire argument is ridiculous. Because to them, it sounds like teams are prioritizing comfort over talent. Supporters keep pointing out that NFL franchises are supposed to be about competition. If Shedeur proves he's the better quarterback, then his popularity shouldn't matter at all. Fans believe the only thing that should determine playing time is performance, not whether the media environment feels inconvenient for coaches or veterans. And honestly, that's a hard argument to dismiss. Especially because sports history is filled with star athletes whose personalities and attention levels were considered too much until they started winning games. Once players succeed, organizations suddenly stop caring about distractions very quickly. That's why this entire shadow conversation feels so uncomfortable to fans. Because some people hear legitimate football concerns, while others hear excuses designed to justify keeping Shedeur lower on the depth chart, no matter how well he performs. And once fans start believing popularity is being held against a player unfairly, the entire conversation becomes emotional fast. There's also another layer to this situation people keep bringing up. Shedeur Sanders already dealt with massive attention at Colorado and still handled enormous pressure publicly every single week. He played under one of the biggest spotlights in college football while constantly being criticized online and in the media. So supporters argue that pressure clearly doesn't scare him. If anything, they believe he thrives in it. That's why this debate keeps getting louder instead of disappearing. Fans now feel like the Browns' quarterback battle isn't just about talent evaluation anymore. It's becoming a larger argument about whether organizations truly want competition or whether they only want competition when it doesn't threaten established narratives. And that leads directly into the biggest frustration Browns fans seem to have right now. Many of them believe people are completely ignoring actual performance in favor of protecting certain quarterbacks. The biggest reason Browns fans are getting so angry right now is because many of them honestly believe the quarterback conversation has stopped being about actual football performance altogether. To them, it feels like people already decided who should start before training camp even has the chance to play out naturally. And that's where the frustration becomes explosive. Because supporters keep asking a very simple question. Why does it seem like Deshaun Watson and Dillon Gabriel are receiving the benefit of the doubt automatically, while Shedeur Sanders has to fight through completely different standards? That question keeps showing up everywhere online. Fans point toward Shedeur handling pressure at Colorado, dealing with non-stop criticism, and still producing under one of the biggest spotlights in college football. They talk about his confidence, leadership, and ability to stay composed while everything around him becomes chaotic. To many supporters, those qualities matter just as much as physical tools. But they rarely hear local media focusing on those things. Instead, they hear conversations about distractions, shadows, popularity, and media attention. And the more that happens, the more fans start believing the actual on-field evaluation is getting lost underneath all the narratives. That's why "play the best quarterback" has become the rallying cry for so many Browns fans right now. People are tired of hearing about contracts, tired of hearing about politics, tired of hearing about what quarterbacks should start because of experience or investment. They simply want the player who performs best to earn the job fairly. And honestly, that sounds reasonable. Even some analysts who aren't necessarily huge Shedeur supporters have admitted the same thing. If Watson looks better, then Watson should play. If Shedeur outperforms everyone, then he should play. If Gabriel somehow surprises people and wins the job, then fine. But many fans feel like the conversation should begin and end with performance instead of narratives surrounding personalities. The problem is that NFL organizations rarely operate that cleanly. Contracts matter. Draft status matters. Public pressure matters. And nowhere is that more obvious than Cleveland's current situation with Deshaun Watson. Because no matter how emotional the Shedeur debate becomes, one reality still hangs over everything. The Browns invested an unbelievable amount of money and draft capital into Watson. That investment changes the entire equation, whether fans like it or not. Some reports and speculation even suggest the organization feels obligated to give Watson every possible opportunity before fully moving on. And if that's true, then Shedeur may already be fighting an uphill battle before he even takes meaningful reps. That's what scares fans the most. Not that Shedeur loses the job fairly, but that the competition may never truly be equal from the beginning. Because once supporters believe decisions are influenced by contracts and reputations more than performance, trust in the process disappears completely. And honestly, the Watson situation only makes those fears stronger. Because now Browns fans are being forced to ask themselves a difficult question. Is Cleveland trying to build for the future, or are they still desperately trying to justify the past? No matter how much Browns fans debate Shedeur Sanders or Dillon Gabriel, every quarterback conversation eventually circles back to the same unavoidable reality. Deshaun Watson's contract still controls everything. And honestly, that's what makes this situation feel almost impossible to untangle fairly. Because the Browns didn't just invest money into Watson, they invested their entire future. Massive guaranteed money, multiple first-round picks, years of organizational commitment. Cleveland tied itself completely to the belief that Watson would eventually return to elite quarterback form. Now they're trapped trying to figure out whether that version of him still exists. That's why many analysts keep insisting the Browns almost have no choice but to give Watson another real opportunity. From the organization's perspective, walking away without fully exhausting every possibility would mean admitting one of the biggest quarterback gambles in NFL history completely failed. And franchises hate admitting mistakes that publicly. That's where fans start getting frustrated though. Because while executives and analysts talk about investments and potential upside, supporters remember what they actually watched on the field recently. They remember offensive struggles, stalled drives, inconsistency, and games where the offense looked completely lifeless. Some fans even described it as some of the worst quarterback play Cleveland has seen in years. That's why trust in Watson feels so damaged right now. And yet, despite all of that, reports still keep surfacing suggesting the Browns may want to open the season with him as the starter anyway. Not because he unquestionably earned it recently, but because the organization still hopes there's some chance he can rediscover what made him special earlier in his career. That's the gamble Cleveland appears stuck chasing. Some analysts even admitted Watson may still possess the highest raw physical ceiling on the roster if he somehow returns to form. The arm talent, the mobility, the experience, it's all still theoretically there, But theories don't win football games. Actual performance does. And that's why the fanbase feels divided. One side believes you have to at least give Watson one final opportunity because the talent once existed at an elite level. The other side believes the Browns are wasting time chasing memories instead of building toward the future with younger quarterbacks. There's also growing speculation online that Cleveland fears what happens publicly if Watson struggles again while Shedeur sits behind him, because the moment the offense starts failing, the pressure for change would become overwhelming immediately. Fans would demand answers. Media coverage would intensify. Every incomplete pass would become another reason people scream for Shedeur Sanders. And honestly, the Browns know that. That's why this entire quarterback competition feels so tense before camp even fully begins. Cleveland isn't just evaluating talent anymore. They're balancing financial pressure, public perception, organizational pride, and future planning all at the same time. Which is exactly why comments about this being a transition year made Browns fans absolutely furious. Because supporters are tired of hearing about patience, while the franchise keeps searching for answers at quarterback year after year after year. The moment analysts started describing this upcoming Browns season as a year of transition, a huge portion of the fanbase completely lost patience. Because for Cleveland fans, hearing phrases like that feels less like optimism and more like another excuse. And honestly, you can understand why they're angry. This franchise has spent decades talking about rebuilding, transitions, future development, and long-term plans. Every few years, there's another reset, another quarterback competition, another explanation about why fans need more patience. So when people started suggesting Cleveland should treat this season as some kind of experimental bridge year, supporters immediately pushed back hard. Especially because the roster doesn't feel like a rebuilding roster. The Browns have talented players. They have expensive veterans. They have playoff expectations from parts of the fanbase. So hearing analysts casually frame the season as a developmental process instantly frustrated people who believe Cleveland should simply focus on winning now. That's why comments from certain radio hosts and analysts resonated strongly online when they said something very direct. Play the best quarterback, that's it. Not the most expensive quarterback. Not the safest media option. Not the player tied to old investments. Just whoever gives the Browns the best chance to win games immediately. And honestly, that simplicity is exactly why fans connected to it. Because Browns supporters are exhausted emotionally, they don't want another season filled with endless quarterback debates while the organization searches for clarity. They want results, they want stability, and more than anything, they want the team to stop overcomplicating situations that should be straightforward. If Shedeur Sanders proves he's better, play him. If Watson proves he still has elite ability, play him. If Dillon Gabriel shocks everyone, fine, play him. That's the mindset fans are demanding now. But the frustration grows because many supporters don't trust the organization to actually operate that way. They believe contracts, narratives, and outside pressure will influence decisions long before pure football evaluation does. That lack of trust is dangerous. Because once fans start believing outcomes are predetermined, every decision becomes controversial automatically. Every Watson rep feels political. Every Shedeur highlight feels ignored. Every media opinion sounds biased. And suddenly, the entire quarterback battle becomes emotionally charged before a single preseason game even happens. There's also another reason Browns fans hated the transition year idea. It almost sounded like lowering expectations before the season even starts. And after everything Cleveland invested into this roster over recent years, supporters simply don't want to hear that anymore. They don't want another excuse explaining why things might not work. They want accountability. They want urgency. and they want whoever earns the quarterback job fairly to actually get the opportunity. But here, where the conversation gets more complicated. Because while fans want Shedeur Sanders starting immediately, some analysts quietly believe sitting him early might actually help his long-term career far more than throwing him directly into this chaos. And that debate is becoming just as intense as the quarterback battle itself. As emotional as Browns fans have become about Shedeur Sanders potentially starting immediately, there's another side of this conversation that's quietly gaining traction among analysts and former players. Some people genuinely believe sitting Shedeur early could actually be the smartest thing for his long-term career. And honestly, it's not a crazy argument. The NFL has destroyed plenty of young quarterbacks by throwing them into unstable situations too quickly. Talented players enter chaotic organizations, get pressured into starting before they're fully ready, lose confidence behind struggling offenses, and suddenly their development completely falls apart. Fans have seen it happen over and over again across the league. That's why some analysts think patience could benefit Shedeur tremendously. Instead of forcing him into immediate pressure, they argue he could spend time learning the speed of NFL defenses, adjusting to professional coverages, and understanding how veteran quarterbacks prepare weekly. Sitting behind a veteran isn't always punishment. Sometimes it genuinely helps young quarterbacks survive long-term. And to be fair, even some Shedeur supporters admit there's logic there. The Browns organization itself still feels unstable emotionally. The Watson situation hangs over everything. Media attention surrounding the quarterback room feels non-stop already. Every practice becomes headline material. Throwing a rookie directly into that chaos immediately could create enormous pressure before he's fully settled into the league. That's why some people believe Cleveland may secretly want to protect Shedeur from the storm surrounding the franchise right now, especially because expectations around him are already massive. If he starts immediately and struggles, critics will attack him instantly. If he sits and develops patiently, the organization can control the timeline more carefully. At least, that's the argument supporters of patience keep making. But here, the problem. Browns fans don't fully trust the organization's intentions anymore. That's what makes this debate so complicated. Many supporters aren't against development itself. They're against the idea that development becomes another excuse to prioritize veterans no matter how poorly they play. Fans have seen too many franchises delay younger quarterbacks while clinging to struggling veterans simply because of contracts or organizational pride. So now every conversation about patience immediately creates suspicion. People start asking whether the Browns truly want Shedeur to develop, or whether they simply don't want the pressure of benching Watson publicly. And honestly, given everything surrounding Watson's contract and media attention, that skepticism makes sense. There's also another reality fans keep bringing up. Some quarterbacks improve by playing. Some players need real game reps to grow through mistakes and adjust naturally to NFL speed. Sitting isn't automatically better for everyone. And because Shedeur already handled enormous pressure at Colorado, supporters believe he may actually thrive under difficult circumstances instead of collapsing from them. That's why this debate refuses to die. One side sees patience as smart development. The other side sees delayed tactics, protecting veterans and narratives. And once training camp actually begins, this conversation could become even more explosive because every practice rep will suddenly feel incredibly important. Especially if one quarterback starts separating himself from the others publicly. That's when Cleveland's already chaotic quarterback situation could spiral completely out of control. The Browns' quarterback battle already feels intense right now, but honestly, this is nothing compared to what training camp could become once real competition starts happening every single day. Because the moment pads come on, every throw will become national news. That's not exaggeration either. Every practice clip involving Shedeur Sanders is already spreading all over social media before preseason even begins. Fans analyze footwork, passes, body language, and coach reactions like playoff film breakdowns. Once camp officially starts, the pressure surrounding this quarterback room could become overwhelming for everyone involved, especially if Deshaun Watson struggles early. Because the second Watson throws interceptions or looks inconsistent during practices, calls for Shedeur Sanders will explode instantly online. Sports shows will start debating it non-stop. Reporters will ask tougher questions. Fans at practices will react emotionally to every single rep. And Cleveland knows exactly how quickly quarterback controversies spiral in this city. The Browns haven't had stability at quarterback in decades, which means fan patience is already extremely fragile. That's why this situation feels so dangerous organizationally. If Watson struggles publicly while Shedeur flashes potential behind him, the media frenzy could become impossible to control. Some rumors and speculation even suggest the Browns are already preparing internally for non-stop outside pressure once camp opens fully. Again, nothing official confirms that, but honestly, it's hard to imagine they aren't aware of what's coming. Because this isn't just a normal rookie quarterback story anymore. Shedeur Sanders brings celebrity-level attention with him everywhere he goes. Cameras follow him constantly. Every comment becomes a headline. Every good throw becomes viral content. And if the Browns' offense struggles at all with Watson leading it, the public pressure to make changes could become unbearable very quickly. That creates a brutal environment for coaches too. Todd Monken won't just be managing football decisions. He'll be managing public expectations, media narratives, locker room dynamics, and one of the loudest fan debates in the NFL simultaneously. Every quarterback rotation decision will get criticized by someone, no matter what he does. And honestly, that pressure can fracture organizations fast if winning doesn't happen immediately. Because once fans believe the wrong quarterback is playing, frustration spreads everywhere. The locker room gets questioned. Media coverage becomes toxic. Every loss turns into another debate about whether Cleveland wasted opportunities by choosing the wrong direction. That's why training camp suddenly feels so important. It may genuinely decide the emotional direction of the entire season before week 1 even arrives. If Watson looks dominant, maybe the controversy quiets temporarily. If Shedeur starts outperforming expectations publicly, the pressure for change could become enormous overnight. And if things stay messy and unclear, this quarterback battle may turn into one of the biggest media storms the Browns have faced in years. At this point, it honestly feels like the Cleveland Browns are standing right in the middle of another franchise-defining quarterback decision, and nobody fully agrees on how this story should end. That's what makes this situation feel so chaotic already. The local media sounds divided. Fans are furious online. Former players and analysts keep sending mixed messages. And now every conversation surrounding Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, or Dillon Gabriel instantly turns into another massive argument about fairness, talent, and organizational priorities. Because deep down, this debate isn't really just about football anymore. It's about trust. Do fans trust the Browns to actually play the best quarterback? Do they trust local media coverage to stay objective? Do they trust the organization to prioritize winning over protecting past mistakes? Those questions now hang over every single practice rep before training camp even officially begins. And honestly, Shedeur Sanders changed the entire energy around this franchise the moment he arrived. Whether people love him or criticize him, nobody ignores him. The spotlight around Cleveland instantly became louder, more emotional, and far more complicated. That attention creates pressure the Browns may not fully control if the quarterback battle starts getting ugly publicly. Meanwhile, Watson's contract continues hovering over everything like a shadow. The Browns invested too much money and too many years into him to move on casually. But at the same time, fans are exhausted from hearing explanations instead of seeing results on the field. That's why patience inside this fanbase feels almost completely gone now. Supporters don't want another season dominated by excuses, transition years, or endless quarterback uncertainty. They want clarity, they want leadership, and more than anything, they want whoever truly earns the job to actually receive the opportunity fairly. But whether that really happens remains the biggest question of all. Because if Watson struggles while Shedeur flashes potential, the pressure for change could become impossible to stop. If Shedeur struggles early, critics will claim the hype was overblown. And if the Browns mishandle this situation publicly, the entire season could spiral into controversy before it even fully starts. That's why this quarterback battle suddenly feels so important. It's not just about who starts week 1 anymore. It's about whether Cleveland finally learned from its past quarterback mistakes, or whether the franchise is about to repeat the exact same cycle all over again.